Here's the first question I have for you. When you started on this journey, did you think or did you envision that it would look like this today?
Yes. Did I say it? No. But as I got more confident, I talked about it. When I originally started, this was when we went big and we went to this center and do 1/3 out of the entire workforce to 200 people. That was the big dream. And to get that across, and that had never been done anywhere else in the world, that was a plenty big dream. What added to it was to give it away. And that's what everybody really wanted to do. That's what really gave it power. We're going to give it away, even our competitors. So the dream of that was, and then I started sharing it. If we can do this, we can change the world. A lot of people talk about that, and throw that around, but I was talking literally. And we used it as a motivator too, because people say, well, how do you get your folks to really buy into this? Because their biggest fear is doing something wrong. The people on the floor, the managers, a lot of people don't hire people with disabilities. They'd like to, but even if they think they might be successful, they worry. Guess what they worry about? What if I do something wrong? That was the biggest thing. So, and they worried about, gee whiz, what if this doesn't work? Am I going to be punished? Is this going to hurt my career? Because you're a northbound train, and we said this is a northbound train. Southbound trains, eastbound trains, but be assured this is not program of the month. This is a northbound train, and you need to get on it or not. If you don't want to get on it, that's fine. But if you're on it, we're going to go all the way. And then they worry, oh, gee whiz, what if it doesn't work? So here's what we told them. That turned out to be a motivator. Here's the deal. If this works, there's not going to be any rewards. You're not going to get an extra bonus. And if it doesn't work, you're not going to be punished. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the standard. Give it your best. Because we want to sleep well at night if it doesn't work. And here's what we're going to do if it doesn't work. We're going to tell the world, because we've announced it to the world, we're going to tell the world that this cannot be done because we couldn't do it. That's what gave it power. And that was the dream. And we did it, and then we let everybody come in and see for themselves. And I will invite you employers, don't believe me. Come see, touch the scars, touch the sides, see, touch. We even have a special tour. It's called the Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus Tour. Because you come there and you go, wow, this can't be real. But it is. And that's what, once people see it, it's gone all over the world now.
In your book, you talk about how there were bumps and bruises along the way to just find enough folks to hire, to get enough folks to hire. And you mentioned a young lady that you hired to be your hiring manager.
Right. Angie.
Can you talk about her a little bit?
Angie has cerebral palsy, CP. She's ambulatory. She walks, which is not all people with CP do that. She has what she calls her sexy walk. And her sexy talk. She was South Carolina. And when I saw her earlier in the year, and I asked Angie, I said, you still got that sexy walk? She says, yeah. And she says, and my husband likes it too. I went, okay. TMI. Angie graduated summa cum laude from Clemson, master's degree. All A's undergraduates, all A's graduate. Couldn't get a job. 30, sent up 300 resumes, 30 interviews, not a single job. Because she said, I knew it was over as soon as they saw me walk in. She saw that, oh my God look on their face that they try to hide. Couldn't get a job. She could only work in other places. Angie is probably the best HR person I've ever worked with. She started with us in Anderson, South Carolina. She's now running her own building in Georgia. Not because of her disability, but because she's the best person. Had we not been looking, we wouldn't have hired Angie because we would have seen the way she walks, and we would have thought, what if there's a fire? Could she get out? Or, she's hard to understand. You really have to pay attention to Angie when she speaks, and maybe people couldn't understand her, or she'd make people feel uncomfortable. Well, guess what? Nobody has a problem understanding Angie, because when Angie speaks, she has something to say. So, and we have stories like that of all kinds of people that we hired that we would have never, ever considered had we not been looking. We would have passed on them. They wouldn't have been able to get through that. We have one young man who performs every job at 150%, who cannot multiply 10 times 60. He would never get through the first screening in our application process. We have a woman who's now a manager who uses a walker. We'd said, well, we have places that are not accessible. Well, guess what? She doesn't need to go at all the places. We'd missed out on her. We have a deaf customer service rep. And now that's not the kind, a good one. You like, sometimes you will, if you're a customer service rep, you don't, you have worked in customer service. But she's the store customer service between the distribution centers and the stores. And I didn't hire her, the GM hired her, and I called him and I said, wow, because there's a lot of phone stuff. How are you going to do this? Are you hiring her just to make a point? He goes, no, we're hiring her because she's the best candidate. And she was fantastic, and she is fantastic with the store managers. We would have passed on all these had we not. The people like Angie and Desiree and all the people there. And there are hundreds like it. Everyone's got a story.
Angie talks about, or you talk about in your book about Angie having to deal with individuals who may not work out.
Oh. Yeah, Angie, nobody wants anybody to fail. And so we knew we would have failures. And we wanted to. And not that we wanted people to fail, but we wanted to give people a chance. Because if you're going to hire people who are sure things, anybody can hire a sure thing. Give people a chance to actually perform the job and see how far they can go. And here's what happens. We don't want to fire those people. And so in the impact it's had, let's say you're their manager, Eric. I give you a person here that has been screened and we think they have the talents for this. So, and they have 13 weeks to be successful. You don't want to fire them. Guess what you do? With any other employee, how do we manage employees? My way or the highway. You need to get this done, or elsewise, 13 weeks, your probation's over, out. You don't want to fire this person. So you work your tail off trying to make them successful so you can sleep at night if they're not successful. And we've had those stories. I'll tell you one. Can I tell you one story?
Yeah.
I know there's more questions.
Oh, okay. But your stories are better than my questions.
See, we invite employers in, and they come and get to hear the stories from managers talking about it. Not bosses, but the frontline managers. What's it like to work here? And they ask the questions. We call it the Las Vegas room. What goes on here stays here. You can ask that question you don't want to ask. You're embarrassed. Like, how do you fire a person with a disability? Or what's a bad day like here? Because certainly it can't be all roses. The stories they will hear sometimes from the managers are not success stories. That the managers are sometimes proud of things that didn't work out. I'll just tell you, you say, well, that sounds cruel. No, here's the story. Jeffrey, I forget what Jeffrey's disability, specific disability, but spatial. He worked on a line where you have to work with a box cutter and it's preparing merchandise for fast pick. So it's very fast paced. You have to figure out lots of things. Of course, the easiest to use is a brown box, and the next thing you know, it's in a store. But there's a lot of things that have to happen. So it's a fast-paced job, and he's working at this station, and he's got about a little bit less area than this to work, and things are moving around, and a custodian came into his area. There's about this much space between people, cleaning it out. Jeffrey goes crazy. He's got his box cutter. He's nonverbal. Starts waving this thing around, yelling. That's pretty scary. So what did they do? Well, the typical way you do it, say you can't do this. This is not permitted behavior, right? That would be a traditional way. Traditional HR, let's bring them in the office. Let's set them down saying this is what happened. Let's try this strategy. If it happens again, here's the consequence. That doesn't work with this population. Here's what they did. They went into stock and they pulled out some duct tape and they made a square around his work area. And they went to Lowe's. They launched their own disability initiative, so that's why I talk about them and not Home Depot. And they put up at the end a 2x4 in a remote doorbell. Okay, and they put a sign on it. Well, first of all, they got big letters and put Jeffrey's workstation, so anybody can see coming into the area. And then somebody gets there and there's a big blue tape and there's this thing right here and there's a sign. It says, "Ring doorbell and wait for Jeffrey to invite you in." And they trained Jeffrey, when he hears bell, 1, put box cutter in. In your pocket there, use the thing like a carpenter's thing. Turn to door, invite guest in. Now, Jeffrey was ultimately not successful for other reasons. But how do you think that manager felt when he didn't work out? We gave it every chance. And what do you think about those typically able people who saw that, saying, gee whiz, if they will do that for him, what kind of place am I working in? The impact on the coworkers and the manager relationship, that managers will say, my number one job, if you talk to most people, they'll say it's about people. They really don't mean it. It means it's about production. In this place, they'll say, my number one job is to make everybody around me successful.
Wow, that's good. That's good. I went to school and studied business economics. You studied economics. One of the things that we are taught, that the corporation's sole purpose is to increase shareholder value. And I love that idea. But you seem to increase shareholder value and done it with your values. Is there a struggle between shareholder value and your values, or even with doing good or becoming great? Do you see that as a struggle, or do they work together?
I think, did everybody hear that question? Why do they have to come into conflict? If you're really talking about shareholder value, which is some amorphous thing, and if you look at the stock market and see the turnover, our average shareholder at Walgreens holds our stock 6 months. So I wouldn't know if they were shareholders or speculators. I think some states, I don't know if Texas is like this. The Delaware is like that. You can be a corporation, that's the primary objective. In Ohio and in Illinois, you can talk about all the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. I don't think it's good business. If you're trying to make money, I don't know many businesses that make money if their objective is only to make money. Mm-hmm. There is some purpose for every organization. At Walgreens, our primary purpose for being was our customers. Customers build businesses, not financiers. It's customers that build it. And so we kind of broke it up. So we have customers, employees, shareholders, community. How do you want to take that mix? What goes first? We tended to act as if the shareholders is the last band. The first band is customers, employees, community, shareholders. And the reason we could say that, you take care of these things, those things will take care of themselves. I was a ditch digger. George, I learned this in Vernon. I was a 14-year-old ditch digger and by the way, we've talked about Vernon's got great soil. How is it out here for digging ditches? There's really sandy, it's really easy. So one day I'm out there and I'm throwing up dust like a storm because the foreman was looking at me. When he would walk away, I didn't do anything, but he was looking at me. And I was making a cloud of dust. And I thought I was pretty impressive. And he comes over and he says, Randy, he says, but you're really working hard. And he says, made make a cloud of dust, really working hard. But I have one suggestion. I noticed that you're not getting very much dirt in the shovel when you're doing it. You're doing a lot of work, but not getting a lot of work done. He said, instead of concentrating on how fast you work, if you concentrate on filling up the back end of the shovel, the front end will take care of itself. Now, that cowboy wisdom is like it's the same thing. You take care of customers, you take care of community, you take care of your employees, the rest will take care of itself. And fortunately, I never had to come into conflict with that. I think why would you work at a place when they say the only people we're worried about are these people who are speculating on our stock? That doesn't fire me up to come. How much time do we spend at work to bring my gifts and dedicate my life to say, if that's what it's all about, it doesn't make sense. But I know there are companies like that, but they have high turnover. I don't see very many people retiring from those. And you get what you pay for. You invest in people, it tends to come back tenfold. That's what we've seen.
In your book, you talk about growing up Church of Christ and
Amen.
Episcopalian now. How much of your faith was exercised in your decision making, in your everyday business walk? What was the integration like?
People will ask me, where did God come into this? It's kind of like the water we swim in. I don't know how to say faith is here. I was brought up in Church of Christ. Great four-piece harmony, by the way, in case all you Baptists want to know. Not interfered by all those instruments. Those are great instruments you use. That was one great thing about it. But I was brought up with the deal. The Bible verse is to whom much is given, much is expected. Is that we're stewards, that we're not victims, and Jesus was a good guy of comfort, but he was also do something, and that probably has guided me through that, and it was really easy. And here's a nice Bible story. I was with my wife one day. We're driving down. My wife Kay, she's the spiritual one in the family. She's going to go, did he really talk about God? So we're driving along one day. And I say, what's your favorite Bible verse? Which is a question you usually ask when you've got a great one that you want to tell them about, but you're being nice and here's hers. So she says, so I've come into the world that you may live life to the full, John. Now, I'm Episcopalian, so at least I knew it was in John, so I'm a real Bible nut in the Episcopal Church. No, it was at least in John. And I thought, well, that's good, honey. That's really good. Thank you. Now, you like to know mine. So I tell her mine. And it's the Good Samaritan. Have y'all heard that story? Okay. So, and the reason I like it, because the question is, he said, the troublesome Pharisees are bugging Jesus again. And they're saying the summary of the law, and he says, the law is to love your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And the second is likened to it, love your neighbor as yourself. For an Episcopalian, that's pretty good. So, and they say, well, great. And he says, do that and you'll be fine. And then they say, well, who is my neighbor? And then he proceeds to tell the story. And the Samaritan is the good guy in this story. And then he says, who was the neighbor? Well, it was the good, who was kind to him. Samaritan was his enemy. We tend to forget that. If you ask most of the people in my church, what's that story about? Oh, it's being nice to people. No, the question he was asking, who is my neighbor? Neighbor is your enemy, that when you're going from Judah to Galilee, you don't even go through there because they are heretics. Those Samaritans, they're our enemies. So that's my favorite. Who is my neighbor? Who is my enemy? I thought. But here's what the other thing. I've learned in that work of trying to do God's work, to be those hands, to be that voice. And oh, by the way, I have no claim for anything special. Just ask my wife. In doing that, the joy of doing that, my wife was completely right. That is living life to the full. The joy of giving doesn't compare to the satisfaction of getting. This is why it has changed all our centers. If you got in here and talked to any of them, you would hear the same thing in different words, and not maybe the word through faith, but you would hear the same thing, that connection as people. You know, Jesus, what they think was about those 12 losers caught in that room after the crucifixion who ended up conquering the Roman Empire. Something happened. How did he set those folks on fire? It wasn't just a theology or a Nicene prayer. It changed their life. We weren't called a church, we were called the way. Church means Jesus within us together. You know, it's not, I'm going to church to get this. I'm there, now we are one body. What do we do? And it's a powerful thing, the joy that comes from that. But religion had a little bit to do with it.
Short answer. You said something at the prayer breakfast that I want to come back because I think it's good to hear. We talked about fears and lies, speaking to you, saying you can't do it, how are you going to do it? You said something to your wife, and your wife responded with a response that made all the difference. Can you tell that real quick?
Yes. So being the leader, you've got to keep everybody, you've got to believe when nobody else will, because they're always looking up. So I had that burden, I believe, but, really, it may not work. I told the president when he asked me about it, he said, will this work? So I said, if it doesn't, you'll never know. So he was okay with that. So I had to think. Now, I didn't know if it was going to work. So I did have some doubts. And Kay and I talked about it. So one morning, I'm sitting there getting ready to work, got my suit on, cup of coffee, looking out in the backyard. Kay's at the table. And I said, honey, I don't know if this thing's going to work. And she just turned to me and said, all the angels in heaven are standing around you. And I thought, good to go. But she could step in and remind me at times, even if it had failed, it would have been a glorious thing to try. Mm-hmm. And I think back, if it had failed and I had gotten all the blame, but I'm pretty good at avoiding blame, so I didn't really worry about that. But if it had failed, the only regret would be that we had not tried enough. Mm-hmm. But if we had given it everything, what else is to be done? That's the way we wanted to feel. We're not going to leave anything on the field. We're going to put it all into it. And if it doesn't work, it'll still be the best thing we've ever done in our life because we tried it. Mm-hmm. We had faith in each other and in ourselves, and we poured out everything we have in this, and we're fine. The king said gravely, start at the beginning and go to the end, and then stop. We could walk away.
One last question. Your book talks about, you share about your daughter and your son and the relationship that they have or had as children. Can you just mention that?
Well, my oldest daughter, she didn't like the other kids coming because she was king of the world for 2 years. Austin's born, and he kind of takes some distraction. Then she gets another one 2 years after that. So Austin gets diagnosed at 3, and that's just a bomb into the family. So how do the children adjust? His younger sister has never known anybody but Austin. Has never known any, that's her normal. Sarah, who's older, she has a different perspective. By the way, Austin has benefited both daughters tremendously. Sometimes I don't see that effect until somebody says something or does something. They have a huge heart for people like Austin. Allison was Austin's co-therapist because we didn't have a babysitter, so he started going to speech therapy at 3 and stayed in it till age 27 every week. Allison, the little baby, she would go along and play with Thomas, take in. They called her the co-therapist. So Austin grew up with Allison. Matter of fact, if he's in trouble, he won't tell Sarah, the older sister. He won't call us. He'll call his younger sister, Allison, who lives in Atlanta. That's the relationship they have. The thing that broke my heart was Sarah leaves home. Austin's not leaving home. And I don't think Austin had an expectation of leaving home because and now he's 34, still lives at home. It's a pretty good gig. And he's pretty handy having a 34-year-old around the house. I imagine, Joel, you're pretty handy around the house too. Is when Allison left for college. And I knew that would have a tremendous impact on Austin. And I'm talking to Allison, and I said, Allison, when you leave for college, Austin's really going to miss you because you're his best friend. Mm-hmm. And Allison says, Dad, I'm not his best friend. I'm his only friend. Because when Austin walks through the classes, down the hall through high school, everybody just parts. He's like a silent phantom moving through the crowd. That broke my heart. And knowing that he doesn't have that longing for relationships, that's what my son does. Mm-hmm. He finds it now at the Lutheran church across the street because they set up a program just for the students to meet. My son changed his whole work schedule for one day on Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock at the Lutheran church across the street so he can be there with his friends. Not so much his peers, those adults who take the time to do that. They have no idea just the gift of an hour a week is the center of my son's life. Because it's easy not to. Something like that.
I want to tell you thank you for sharing your life and your family with us, and we appreciate you coming all the way out here to Abilene to do it. But I can tell you this much, not one of us that has heard you today has not been changed. And I appreciate what you've done in the past and what you're going to do in the future. And if we can, let's give him a round of applause for